Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The apartment was dead quiet when I got home from my afternoon economics lecture that Thursday, in October 2022. I was 21, junior year at State College, living in this cramped two-bedroom place about 15 minutes from campus, with my roommate Jason, who worked nights at a warehouse. The building was one of those converted old houses from the 60s, split into 4 units, with paper-thin walls and radiators that clanged like someone was hitting them with a hammer. I remember dropping my backpack by the couch and heading straight to the kitchen, because I hadn't eaten since breakfast. Just grabbed a granola bar on my way out that morning. The dishes from yesterday were still piled in the sink, and I could smell that weird musty odor that always came up from the basement through the vents when it rained. Outside, the street was empty except for Mrs. Novak's orange tabby cat sitting on the fence post, watching nothing in particular the way cats do. I was spreading peanut butter on bread when I heard the front door open and close. Not unusual. Jason sometimes came home between his shifts to grab dinner or change clothes, and he had this habit of never announcing himself, just walking in like a ghost. The door made that specific scraping sound against the frame that I'd been meaning to fix for months, but never got around to. I kept making my sandwich, heard footsteps moving through the living room, that familiar creak of the third floorboard from the wall that always gave under any weight. "You're home early," I called out, but got no answer, which was typical Jason behavior when he was tired. The footsteps continued down the hallway toward his room, and I heard what sounded like him going into the bathroom. The door handle there had this loose rattle that you'd recognize anywhere. I finished making my sandwich, grabbed a Coke from the fridge, and was about to head to my room to start on my statistics homework when I noticed Jason's work boots by the front door. The brown Timberlands with the paint splatter on the left toe that he wore every single day to the warehouse. My whole body went rigid, like every muscle locked up at once. If Jason's boots were here by the door, then whoever was walking around in our apartment wasn't Jason. I stood there in the kitchen, sandwich in one hand, can of Coke in the other, trying to process what this meant, while my brain kept insisting there had to be some explanation. Maybe he had other shoes? But no, Jason only owned those boots and a pair of beat-up Nikes he wore to the gym. The footsteps had stopped now, and the apartment had gone completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock above the stove. I set down my food as quietly as I could on the counter, wincing when the can made a small metallic tap against the formica. My phone was in my backpack in the living room, might as well have been on the moon. I grabbed a knife from the dish rack, just a regular kitchen knife, nothing special, but it was something. The smart thing would have been to leave immediately, just bolt out the front door and call the cops from outside. But I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting, maybe there was some explanation. And besides, all my stuff was here. My laptop with all my schoolwork, my wallet on my desk, everything. I moved toward the hallway, trying to avoid the squeaky spots in the floor I knew by heart from late-night trips to the bathroom. The hallway stretched out ahead of me, 5 doors total. Bathroom on the left, linen closet, Jason's room, my room at the end, and the laundry room on the right. All the doors were closed except the laundry room, which was open about halfway, just darkness visible through the gap. That door was never closed properly anyway, because the frame was warped and you had to really yank it shut. I was about 3 feet from the laundry room door when I heard breathing that wasn't mine, slow and controlled, coming from inside that darkened space. I pushed the door open with the tip of the knife, and there he was. A man crouched down between the washer and the dryer, holding a crowbar across his knees. He was maybe 45, wearing a faded denim jacket despite the warm weather, work pants with dried mud on the knees and these scuffed yellow construction boots. His face had that weathered look of someone who worked outdoors, deep lines around his eyes, stubble that was going gray, and he had this calm expression like I'd just caught him tying his shoe instead of hiding in my laundry room. The crowbar had scratches all along its length and what looked like rust or maybe old paint at the curved end. He didn't jump up or try to run. He just shifted his weight slightly, still crouching, and looked at me with these pale blue eyes that didn't blink nearly enough. The laundry room smelled like fabric softener and something else, maybe cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes, and I could see he'd moved our detergent bottles around on the shelf above the machines. "Hey there," he said, and his voice was weirdly casual, like we were neighbors meeting at the mailbox. He stood up slowly, keeping the crowbar low at his side, not threatening exactly, but not putting it down either. "Real sorry about this. I thought this place was vacant. The lady at the rental office, short woman with the glasses and the lisp, she told me Unit 2B was empty, and I could take a look around before the showing tomorrow." His story came out smooth, rehearsed, but Unit 2B was Mrs. Novak's place downstairs, and she'd lived there for 15 years. He took a small step forward, just enough to make me step back, and I noticed he was positioned perfectly to block my view of whatever was behind him in the corner of the laundry room. Stupid mistake on my part. Must have gotten the numbers mixed up. You know how these old buildings are, the numbers on the doors are all worn off. Except our door had a brand new brass number that Jason installed last month after the old one fell off. The way he kept talking, maintaining that fake friendly tone while gripping the crowbar, made my skin prickle all over. I could see now what he'd been blocking. Our toolbox was open on the floor, and Jason's electric drill was sitting next to it along with a handful of other things I couldn't quite make out. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he angled his body slightly like he was going to try to squeeze past me in the narrow hallway. "Really sorry about the confusion. I'll just head out and call the rental office, straighten this whole thing out." He was close enough now that I could see a scar running through his left eyebrow. Could smell that cigarette smoke mixed with something metallic, maybe WD-40 or some other industrial smell. The crowbar shifted in his grip, and I saw his knuckles had old scars across them, the kind you get from punching things. My own hand was getting sweaty around the knife handle, and I knew he could see it trembling slightly. "You need to leave right now," I said, surprised my voice came out steady when everything inside me was screaming. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was doing math in his head, calculating something. Then he smiled, not a big smile, just this small upturn at the corners of his mouth that made my chest go tight. "Sure thing, kid. No harm done, right? Just a misunderstanding." He moved past me then, so close that the crowbar brushed against my leg, the metal cold even through my jeans. I turned to keep facing him as he walked down the hallway, never putting my back to him, and he moved with this deliberate slowness like he wanted me to know he wasn't scared, wasn't rushing. When he reached the living room, he stopped and looked around, taking in the TV, Jason's PlayStation, my backpack on the floor. "Nice place you got here, real nice." Then he walked to the front door, opened it and stepped out onto the landing. But before closing it, he looked back at me and said, "You should really lock this door, kid. Anybody could walk in." The door clicked shut, and I heard his footsteps going down the stairs unhurried, taking their time. I rushed to the door and turned the deadbolt, then the chain lock, then stood there with my forehead pressed against the wood, trying to stop the shaking that had taken over my whole body. Through the peephole, I could see him standing in the front yard, looking up at our window, just standing there in broad daylight like he owned the place. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, then walked to a van parked across the street. A white Ford Econoline with no windows in the back, some kind of company logo on the side that was too faded to read. He got in but didn't drive away immediately, just sat there for maybe 2 minutes while I watched through the peephole, my legs starting to cramp from standing on my toes. Finally, the van started up with a rough idle that needed engine work, and he pulled away slowly, taking a right at the stop sign. I grabbed my phone from my backpack and called 911, my fingers fumbling with the numbers twice before I got it right. The cops showed up about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, one older guy with gray at his temples who did most of the talking, and a younger woman who took notes and photos of the laundry room. They found Jimmy marks on the front door lock that I hadn't noticed, fresh scratches in the brass where he'd worked the crowbar before, just turning the handle and walking in because I'd forgotten to lock it after getting home. In the laundry room, they found more than I'd seen. He'd collected Jason's drill, a socket wrench set, an old tablet Jason kept in there for playing music while doing laundry, and weirdly a box of our laundry detergent pods. Probably grabbing anything he could sell, the older cop said, bagging the items as evidence even though they were ours. They asked me to describe him and I did my best, but when they ran it through their system, nothing definitive came up. These guys usually work a neighborhood for a while, the female officer told me. Hit places during work hours when they think no one's home. You were lucky. Most of the time when they get caught inside, it goes differently. Jason came home while the cops were still there, walked in to find our apartment full of uniforms, and immediately went pale. After I explained everything, he just kept saying, "Jesus Christ," over and over, walking through the apartment, checking things, double-checking the windows, testing the locks. The cops gave us a case number and said a detective might follow up, but they were honest about the chances of catching the guy, unless he tries this again and someone else calls it in, or we get lucky with prints. The prints they lifted from the crowbar and doorknob didn't match anything in the system. That night, neither of us could sleep. We pushed the couch against the front door, and Jason slept in the living room with a baseball bat while I stayed in my room with the door locked and a chair wedged under the handle. Every sound in that old building, the radiator clanging, footsteps from upstairs, a car door slamming outside, had us both jumping up to check the peephole. We stayed like that for 3 weeks, taking turns sleeping, installing new deadbolts, a door alarm, even a security camera that Jason's brother helped us mount above the entrance. Then one afternoon, Jason called me from work, his voice strange and tight. "Check the news," he said. "Channel 7, they just showed his picture." The man with the crowbar had been arrested 2 towns over after a homeowner shot him when he broke into the wrong house, a place where the owner was homesick from work, armed and ready. He'd survived, and when they searched his van, they found stolen items from dozens of homes, including Jason's drill with his initials carved into the handle. His name was Gregory Fulton, 47 years old, with a record going back 20 years for burglary, assault, and possession. The news showed his mugshot, and there were those pale blue eyes that didn't blink enough, that same thin-lipped mouth, though now bruised and swollen from his encounter with the armed homeowner. They said he'd been targeting college neighborhoods specifically because students were predictable, careless about locking doors, and unlikely to be armed. We got Jason's drill back eventually, after the trial where Gregory got 15 years, but we'd already moved out by then. Found a place on the 3rd floor of a building with a doorman, security cameras, and doors that locked automatically. Still checked them twice before bed, though. It was a Tuesday evening in late November when everything changed for me. I was 28, living alone in a small rental house on the outskirts of Denver, working remotely as a graphic designer for a marketing firm downtown. The house was nothing special, a 2-bedroom ranch from the 60s with creaky floors and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. But it was mine, at least for the time being, and after years of roommates and shared spaces, having my own place felt like freedom. That particular day had been ordinary, almost boring even. I'd spent hours tweaking logos for a client who kept changing their mind, had a frozen burrito for lunch, and was planning to binge some true crime documentary before bed. The sun had set around 5, and by 7, the neighborhood was that peculiar kind of quiet you only get in residential areas during weeknight evenings. I was getting ready to meet up with my friend Megan later that week, and she'd been bugging me about what I was planning to wear to this art gallery opening she'd gotten us tickets for. Standing in my bedroom, I'd finally settled on this black dress I'd bought months ago but never worn. The tags were still on it, and I wanted to make sure it actually looked decent before committing to it. My bedroom mirror was perfect for outfit checks. one of those full-length ones I'd gotten from Target that leaned against the wall at just the right angle. I grabbed my phone, positioned myself to get the whole outfit in frame, and started snapping a few photos. The lighting in my bedroom was actually pretty good at that time of evening. The overhead fixture mixed with the warm glow from my bedside lamp created this soft, flattering effect that made everything look better than it probably was. After taking maybe 5 or 6 shots, I was scrolling through them, trying to pick the best one to send to Megan. You know how it is with mirror selfies. The first few are always trash, your face looks weird, or the angle makes your proportions all wrong. I was about to delete the 3rd photo when something caught my eye. In the mirror's reflection, beyond my bedroom doorway, I could see straight through to part of my kitchen. The layout of my house was pretty open. From my bedroom, you could see down the hallway into the living room and catch a glimpse of the kitchen beyond. But there, in the darker part of the kitchen near the breakfast nook, was something that shouldn't have been there. It was like a dark mass taller than my kitchen table, but not quite defined enough to make out clearly in the photo. At first, I thought maybe it was just a shadow from the refrigerator, or possibly my winter coat that I sometimes threw over the kitchen chairs. But the longer I stared at that photo, zooming in and adjusting my phone's brightness, the more wrong it looked. The shape was too tall, too human-like in its proportions. It seemed to be standing near the sliding glass door that led to my backyard, just at the edge of where the kitchen light reached. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to rationalize what you're seeing. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe something had fallen and was leaning against the wall. Maybe my eyes were just tired from staring at screens all day. I even took another selfie right then, same angle, same position, just to compare. The new photo showed the same view into the kitchen, but that dark shape wasn't there anymore. The breakfast nook was empty, just my little round table with its mismatched chairs, the pile of mail I'd been meaning to sort through, and the ceramic bowl where I dropped my keys every day. The rational part of my brain was telling me to just forget about it and send Megan the damn photo already. But I couldn't stop comparing the two images, swiping back and forth between them on my phone. In the first one, that shape was definitely there. Dark, solid, and absolutely should not have been in my kitchen at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday night when I lived alone. My chest started feeling tight, that weird sensation you get when your body knows something's wrong before your brain fully accepts it. I set my phone down on the bed and just listened. The house was quiet except for the usual sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the heating system clicking on, a dog barking somewhere down the street. Nothing out of place. I grabbed my phone again, turned on the flashlight feature, and slowly walked out of my bedroom. The hallway felt longer than usual, and I kept the light trained ahead of me even though the living room lamp was on. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it after dinner. A single plate in the sink, a glass with a little bit of water still in it, the dishwasher humming through its cycle. I stood there for a moment, scanning every corner, checking behind the breakfast bar, even opening the pantry door to peer inside. Nothing. Nobody. Just my regular kitchen with its outdated linoleum and the collection of succulents dying slowly on the windowsill. But then my eyes landed on the sliding glass door that led to the backyard, and everything in my body went cold. The lock was turned to the open position, and the door itself was open maybe 2 or 3 inches. Not enough to be immediately obvious, but enough that the November air was creeping in, making the vertical blinds sway slightly. I never, ever left that door unlocked. I was obsessive about it, actually, checking it every night before bed, sometimes twice just to be sure. Standing there staring at that open door, I had 2 choices: grab my keys and run to my car, or check if someone was still in the house. The smart choice would have been to leave immediately, but I needed my car keys, and those were sitting in that ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter, which meant walking closer to the open door. I grabbed a knife from the block on the counter, the biggest one I had, some ridiculous chef's knife I'd bought during a brief phase when I thought I'd learned to cook properly. The weight of it in my hand was both reassuring and terrifying because it meant I was accepting that someone had been, or might still be, in my house. I used my foot to push the sliding door completely closed, turned the lock with shaking fingers, and then jammed the security bar into place. the one I usually forgot to use. The backyard was dark, just the faint outline of my neighbor's fence and the shed I never used visible in the moonlight. That's when I heard it, a sound from the other side of the house. Not footsteps exactly, more like something being moved or shifted. It came from the direction of the spare bedroom, the one I used as a home office. My laptop was in there, along with some camera equipment and a few other electronics. The door to that room was closed, which was wrong because I always left it open to let the heat circulate better. I stood in my kitchen, gripping that knife, trying to decide what to do. The sound came again. Definitely something moving in there, like someone trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. My phone was still in my bedroom, sitting uselessly on the bed where I'd left it. The smart thing would be to leave right now, get to my car, drive away and call the police from somewhere safe. But something made me need to know what was happening in my own house. Who had the audacity to come into my space? I moved through the living room as quietly as I could, avoiding the squeaky spot near the coffee table that I'd learned about from late-night snack runs. The spare bedroom door was about 15 feet away, and I could see a thin line of light coming from underneath it. Not the overhead light, but something dimmer, maybe the desk lamp. As I got closer, the sounds became clearer. It was definitely someone going through things, the distinctive sound of papers being shuffled, drawers being opened. They weren't even trying to be that quiet anymore, probably thinking I was still in my bedroom taking selfies like an idiot. I positioned myself to the side of the door, knife held high, and reached for the doorknob with my free hand. The metal was cold, and I could feel my pulse in my throat as I turned it slowly. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open fast and hard, letting it bang against the wall. There was a man in my office, crouched next to my desk with my external hard drive in his hands. He wasn't what I expected, not some hulking, intimidating figure, but a skinny guy, maybe early 30s, wearing jeans and a faded Broncos hoodie. His face went white when he saw me, and for a second, we both just stared at each other. He had watery blue eyes and a patchy beard, and there was a backpack on the floor next to him that looked like it was already half full with my stuff. The desk lamp was on, casting weird shadows across the room, and I could see my laptop was missing from its usual spot. "Get out," I heard myself say, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Get out of my house right now." The knife was still in my hand, pointed at him, and I think we were both equally shocked by the situation. He dropped the hard drive, and it clattered on the hardwood floor, the sound impossibly loud in the tense silence. "Lady, I don't want any trouble," he said, raising his hands slightly but not standing up yet. His voice was higher than I expected, nervous and scratchy. "I thought nobody was home. Your car wasn't in the driveway." That's when I remembered. I'd parked in the garage that day because I'd gotten groceries and didn't want to carry them as far. This pathetic man had been watching my house, learning my patterns, waiting for the right moment. The violation of it all hit me like a physical force. I said, "Get out." This time I screamed it, taking a step forward with the knife. That got him moving. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed his backpack, and my laptop fell out of it onto the floor with a sickening crack. We both looked at it for a split second, then he bolted past me, careful to stay out of knife range. I followed him through the living room, watched him fumble with the front door lock. Apparently he'd come in through the back but planned to leave through the front like a regular visitor. The moment he was out, I slammed the door shut, locked the deadbolt, and put the chain on. Through the peephole, I watched him run down my driveway and disappear into the darkness of the street. No car that I could see. He must have parked somewhere else or come on foot. My legs finally gave out, and I slid down against the door, still clutching that ridiculous knife. That's when I remembered my phone and practically crawled back to my bedroom to get it. I called 911, and while I waited for the police, I noticed something that made my skin prickle all over again. In my closet, several of my dresser drawers were slightly open. He'd been in my bedroom too, going through my things while I was standing right there, completely oblivious, taking photos in the mirror. The police found his entry point. He'd removed the screen from my home office window and jimmied it open. They said I was lucky, that confronting him could have gone much worse. but I don't feel lucky. I moved out 2 weeks later, broke my lease and everything. That house never felt safe again, knowing someone had been walking through my rooms, touching my things, watching me without my knowledge. I was 17 that summer, staying at my dad's place in Phoenix while he was away on a business trip to Seattle. He'd just gotten divorced from my stepmom earlier that year, and the house felt different without her around. Emptier somehow, with all her knickknacks gone from the shelves and her smell no longer lingering in the hallways. Dad trusted me enough to leave me alone for a week, figured I was old enough to handle myself. I spent most of my days playing video games in the living room and eating cereal for dinner, enjoying the freedom of not having anyone tell me to clean my room or turn the music down. The neighborhood was one of those quiet suburban areas where the biggest excitement was when someone got a new car or painted their fence a different color. It was a Sunday night in July when everything went sideways, around 2 in the morning when the heat finally started to break and you could actually breathe without feeling like you were drowning in hot soup. I'd been tossing and turning for hours, my sheets damp with sweat because the AC unit in my room had been making this weird clicking noise for days and barely pushed out any cold air. My bedroom was at the end of the hallway, and from my bed I had a clear view straight through my open door, down the hall, and into part of the kitchen if I propped myself up on my elbow. I always slept with my door open because the house got better airflow that way, and honestly, being alone in that big, empty house made me feel less isolated when I could hear the normal sounds of the refrigerator humming and the ceiling fan creaking in the living room. That's when I heard the sliding glass door in the back of the house slowly grinding along its track. Not the quick swoosh when someone who knows the door opens it, but this long, drawn-out scraping sound like whoever was doing it wanted to be quiet, but didn't know about the spot where the track was bent from when I accidentally hit it with the lawnmower last spring. My whole body went rigid in bed, every muscle tensing up while my brain tried to process what I was hearing. The door continued its slow journey for what felt like 30 seconds but was probably only 5 or 6, and then came the soft thump of it hitting the rubber stopper at the end. Someone had just opened the back door completely, not just cracked it for air, but pushed it all the way open like they planned on coming inside. I laid there paralyzed, telling myself maybe it was just the wind, except there hadn't been even a breeze all day and that door was heavy enough that you really had to put some muscle into moving it. Then I heard footsteps on the kitchen tiles, not rushed or sneaky but casual, like someone walking into their own house after work. Each step was deliberate and unhurried, accompanied by this odd shuffling sound, like the person was dragging something or maybe wearing slippers that were too big. The footsteps paused, and I heard the refrigerator door open with that distinctive suction sound it made, the rubber seal releasing, and then the bright light from inside spilled out into the hallway, sending a long rectangle of yellow light that reached almost to my doorway. From where I was lying, if I lifted my head just slightly off the pillow, I could see a sliver of the kitchen, and what I saw made my heart pound so hard I was sure whoever was in there would hear it. There was a man standing in front of the open fridge, just standing there like he was contemplating what to eat for a midnight snack. He was wearing what looked like a mechanic's jumpsuit, the kind with a name patch on the chest, except it was filthy, covered in dark stains and what might have been dried mud or worse. His hair was long and greasy, hanging down past his shoulders in thick clumps, and even from my room I could smell him, this mixture of body odor, motor oil, and something sweet and rotten, like fruit that had been left in the sun too long. He wasn't rushing, wasn't grabbing things and running. He was examining items in the fridge, picking up my dad's beer bottles and setting them back down, opening Tupperware containers and sniffing the contents. The worst part was how normal he was trying to act, humming some tune I didn't recognize while he rummaged through our food, occasionally making these little satisfied grunts when he found something he liked. He pulled out a package of sliced turkey, peeled it open right there, and started eating the meat with his fingers, letting the juice drip onto the floor my dad had just had refinished last month. After each piece, he'd lick his fingers clean with these long, exaggerated motions, like he was savoring every drop. Then he moved on to a jar of pickles, twisted off the lid with a strength that made the muscles in his neck bulge, and drank the juice straight from the jar before fishing out pickles with his dirty fingers. My phone was charging on the desk across the room. Might as well have been a mile away for how impossible it seemed to reach it without making noise. Every few seconds, the man would shift his position, and I could see more of him. The way his jumpsuit was unzipped halfway down, revealing a stained white undershirt, the work boots that left black scuff marks on the clean floor, and what looked like a wrench sticking out of his back pocket. He grabbed a carton of orange juice, the expensive kind my dad bought from the farmer's market, and started chugging it directly from the container, some of it spilling down his chin and neck, creating wet patches on his already filthy clothes. When he finished, he didn't put it back. He just set it on the counter and let out this long, satisfied belch that echoed through the quiet house. Then he did something that made every hair on my body stand up. He stopped moving entirely and just stood there in the light of the open refrigerator, his head slightly tilted like he was listening for something. His breathing got heavier, these deep inhales through his nose like he was trying to smell something specific, and then he spoke, not loudly, but in this conversational tone like he was talking to someone standing right next to him. "Nice place," he said, his voice rough and phlegmy. "Real nice place you got here, kid." My entire body went cold because there was no way he could see me from where he was standing, but somehow he knew I was there, knew I was awake and watching him violate my home with his presence. He started walking then, not toward my room but into the living room, and I could hear him touching things. The distinctive squeak of the leather couch when he sat down, the jingle of my dad's keys on the coffee table being picked up and set back down, the TV remote clicking but the TV not turning on because I'd taken the batteries out earlier to put in my game controller. "Dead batteries," he muttered, and then laughed, this wet, choking sound that turned into a cough. He walked over to the mantel where my dad kept photos of our family, and I heard the frames being moved around, picked up, maybe examined in the dim light coming through the windows. "Pretty family," he said to no one, or maybe to me, knowing I could hear every word. "Real pretty. Shame about the divorce though, yeah, real shame when families break apart like that." The fact that he knew about the divorce made my chest tighten with a different kind of fear. This wasn't random. He'd been watching us, knew things about our life that a stranger shouldn't know. I heard him walk down the hallway toward the bathroom, his boots heavy on the hardwood, and then the sound of him urinating with the door wide open, not even pretending to need privacy. The toilet didn't flush afterward. Instead, I heard the medicine cabinet open, bottles rattling as he pawed through them. "Sleeping pills," he read out loud, "anxiety medication, blood pressure meds, somebody's stressed in this house." Each word was like he was building a profile of my family, gathering intelligence from our private spaces, and there was nothing I could do but lie there, pretending to be asleep while this stranger mapped out our lives through our belongings. Then his footsteps started coming back down the hallway, slower this time, and they stopped right at my doorway. I could see his shadow blocking the dim light from the kitchen, this massive dark shape just standing there. I forced myself to breathe slowly and evenly, even though my lungs wanted to hyperventilate, keeping my eyes nearly closed but still able to see through my lashes. He stood there for what must have been 2 full minutes just watching me, and I could hear his breathing, raspy and irregular, mixed with this weird clicking sound he was making with his tongue against his teeth. "You're good at playing dead, kid," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Real good. Your daddy taught you that, or did you learn it after he started leaving you alone in this big house?" He knew I was awake, had known the whole time, and was enjoying the game of me pretending otherwise. He took one step into my room, just one, and I could smell him even stronger now, that sick sweet stench mixed with something chemical, like paint thinner or cleaning fluid. "I could come in," he said, still in that conversational whisper. "Could come right in and sit on the edge of your bed, have a real talk about things. But that's not what tonight's about." He pulled something from his pocket, and I heard the distinctive sound of a Polaroid camera, that mechanical whir and click, followed by the photo sliding out. "Just wanted to remember this moment," he said, and then he turned and walked back down the hall, his footsteps unhurried, taking his time like he had all night to do whatever he wanted in our house. I listened as he went back to the kitchen, opened a few more cabinets, ran water in the sink for some reason, and then finally, I heard him walking toward the back door. But he didn't leave right away. He stood there at the open sliding door, and I could hear him breathing in the night air. "You should tell your daddy about the lock on this door," he called out, his voice carrying clearly through the house. "That bent track makes it real easy to pop open from the outside if you know the trick. Been that way since spring, hasn't it? Since that lawnmower accident?" He knew about that too, had probably been watching even then, and the thought made me want to vomit. The door slid closed with that same slow grinding sound, and then I heard something that confused me, the click of it locking from the outside, which should have been impossible. I stayed frozen in that bed for another hour, maybe 2, until the sky started getting light outside and I could hear birds beginning their morning songs. Only then did I grab my phone and call 911, my voice shaking so bad the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat myself 3 times. The cops found the back door locked properly. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen except the food he'd eaten. They found boot prints in the backyard that led to and from the alley, and one officer mentioned that the lock mechanism had been tampered with months ago. Someone had installed a way to lock and unlock it from outside that would be almost impossible to notice unless you knew what to look for. They never found the guy, but I did find something tucked under my windshield wiper 2 days later when my dad was back home. A Polaroid photo of me lying in bed, eyes squeezed shut, pretending to sleep while a shadow loomed in my doorway. Last Saturday changed everything about how I feel in my own home. I'm 28, been living alone in this rental house in suburban Portland for about 2 years now, and up until that day, I'd never once felt unsafe here. It's a quiet neighborhood, mostly families and retired couples, the kind of place where people still wave when you pass them walking their dogs. I work from home doing graphic design, which means I'm here pretty much all day, every day. That morning started like any other. Coffee, emails, a client revision that needed to be done by Monday. The weather was gorgeous. One of those perfect spring days where you leave all the windows open and let the fresh air flow through. I remember specifically because I'd just finished cleaning the whole house and was feeling pretty good about life in general. Around 11:30, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in his 40s, maybe early 50s, wearing a navy polo shirt with some kind of logo I couldn't quite make out. He had this clipboard in one hand and a metal toolbox at his feet, the kind with multiple compartments that fold out like stairs. His hair was slicked back with too much gel, and he kept adjusting his collar like it was bothering him. When I opened the door but kept the chain on, he immediately launched into this rehearsed speech about annual pest inspections for the neighborhood. Said his name was Craig from Residential Defense Solutions, and that they'd been contracted by the property management company to check all the houses on my street. The way he kept trying to peek past me into the house while talking made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. I asked him for identification and any paperwork from my property management company. He fumbled with his clipboard, flipping through what I could now see were mostly blank pages with a few random printed forms on top. He said he must have left the work order in the truck and offered to go get it, but then immediately tried a different angle, saying it would only take 15 minutes and that all the other neighbors had already let him in. The thing that really got me was his shoes. Pristine white sneakers without a single scuff or dirt mark. Weird for someone who'd supposedly been going in and out of houses all morning. Plus, my property management company always sends emails about any scheduled maintenance at least a week in advance, and I'd gotten nothing. When I told him I'd need to verify with them first, his whole demeanor shifted. The friendly salesman's smile stayed plastered on his face, but his jaw clenched and his grip on the clipboard turned his knuckles white. He stood there for an uncomfortable few seconds, just staring at me through the gap in the door. Then he asked if maybe my husband was home and could make the decision. When I said I lived alone, stupid I know, but it just came out automatically. His eyes lit up in this way that made my whole body tense up. He quickly covered it by nodding and saying he understood, that he'd come back another time when it was more convenient. But instead of leaving right away, he made this show of writing something on his clipboard, asking me to spell my last name twice and confirm my phone number, which I didn't give him. He even asked what time I usually get home from work, for scheduling purposes. I just kept repeating that he should coordinate through the property management company and started closing the door. He put his foot near the threshold, not quite blocking it but close enough to make me panic for a second, then pulled it back with a laugh, saying he didn't mean to be pushy. After he finally left, I watched through the living room window as he walked back to his vehicle, a white van with no company logos or phone numbers, just completely blank. He sat in the driver's seat for way too long, maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and I could see him looking at my house, writing things down. Eventually he drove off, but only to park 3 houses down where he sat for another 10 minutes before leaving the street entirely. I immediately called my property management company, and they confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't scheduled any pest control services, and they'd never heard of residential defense solutions. The woman on the phone seemed concerned and said she'd send out a notice to all tenants warning them about the fake service calls. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? A pushy salesman came to my door and made me uncomfortable? Technically, he hadn't done anything illegal. The rest of the day, I couldn't focus on work at all. Every little sound made me jumpy. The mailman dropping off packages, a neighbor's dog barking, even the ice maker in my freezer kicking on. Around 4 in the afternoon, I decided to take my laptop to a coffee shop just to get out of the house for a while. When I came back around 7, everything looked normal. I checked all the locks twice, made dinner, and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. But something kept nagging at me. This weird feeling that things weren't exactly how I'd left them, though I couldn't point to anything specific. My trash can seemed like it had been moved slightly, and the garden hose was uncoiled a bit more than I remembered. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I even laughed at myself for walking around my own house like I was in some crime show, checking closets and behind shower curtains. That night, I barely slept. Every time I started drifting off, I'd hear something, or think I heard something, outside. Around 2 in the morning, there was definitely a noise by my bedroom window, like branches scraping against the siding, except the nearest tree is a good 10 feet away. I lay there, frozen, straining to hear over my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. After about 20 minutes of silence, I finally got brave enough to peek through the blinds. Nothing there but my own backyard bathed in moonlight. I eventually fell asleep around 4, only to wake up at 8 feeling completely drained. Sunday morning sunlight was streaming in. Birds were chirping, and everything seemed so normal that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole threatening vibe from the day before. I made breakfast, did some laundry, even managed to finish that client revision I'd abandoned on Saturday. It wasn't until around noon, when I went outside to water my small vegetable garden, that I saw them. Footprints in the dirt, leading from my front porch around the side of the house. My stomach turned to ice as I followed them. They went straight to my bedroom window, where the dirt was all pressed down like someone had stood there for a while. The prints were deep, from someone heavy, with a distinctive waffle pattern on the sole. Right under the window, there were 2 cigarette butts ground into the mulch, the brand with the gold band around the filter. I remembered seeing Craig holding that exact brand of cigarettes in his shirt pocket yesterday. But what really made me want to throw up was finding the small pile of wood shavings on the windowsill, like someone had been working at the lock with a knife or tool. The lock itself had fresh scratch marks all around it, bright silver gouges in the painted metal. I ran back inside and called 911 immediately. While waiting for the police, I noticed more things I'd missed before. The motion sensor light on that side of the house had been unscrewed just enough to disable it. There was a partial handprint on the glass of the window, like someone had pressed their palm against it while trying to see inside. The officer who showed up, a younger guy named Daniels, took it seriously right away. He photographed everything, bagged the cigarette butts, even called for another unit to canvass the neighborhood. Turns out I wasn't the only one. 2 other women on nearby streets had reported the same fake pest control guy in the past week, though I was the first where he'd come back. Officer Daniels had me walk through the entire interaction again, and when I mentioned the white van with no markings, he got on his radio immediately. They'd been tracking similar reports from 3 different neighborhoods, all targeting women living alone. The detective who came later, a woman named Harper, was even more thorough. She had me go through my daily routine, asked about any recent changes, whether I'd noticed anyone following me or any strange cars. That's when I remembered something that made everything click into place. About 2 weeks earlier, I'd posted on a local Facebook marketplace group selling some old furniture. Several people had come by to look at items, and I'd stupidly mentioned to one guy that I needed to sell stuff quickly because my roommate had moved out and I needed the extra space. He'd seemed normal enough, bought an old dresser, even had his teenage son with him to help load it, but now I wondered if that had been his son at all. Detective Harper showed me a photo array, and there he was, Craig, except his real name was Nathan Briggs, and he had 2 prior arrests for attempted burglary and 1 for stalking. They arrested him that same night at a motel about 20 miles away. The police found my address written on a napkin in his van, along with the addresses of 5 other women and notes about their schedules when they were home alone, details about their routines. He had a whole kit in the back, lockpicks, a glass cutting tool, duct tape, zip ties, and a camera with photos of my house from different angles, including ones of me through my kitchen window from earlier that week that I'd never known he was taking. Detective Harper told me he'd been watching for days, learning when I worked out, when I got groceries, when I turned my lights off at night. The Facebook furniture sale had just been how he initially identified me, but he'd done research after that. Found my LinkedIn, my Instagram, pieced together that I worked from home and lived alone. They also found the polo shirt with a fake pest control logo he'd had printed at some local shop, along with 2 other shirts for different fake services. The trial was 6 months later, and I had to testify about that Saturday, about finding those footprints and cigarette butts and scratches on my window lock. He pled guilty to attempted burglary and stalking charges, got 4 years in state prison. I thought I'd feel safer after that, but I don't. I moved 2 months after it happened, broke my lease early, and paid the penalty because I couldn't sleep in that bedroom knowing he'd stood right outside, trying to get in while I was lying there in the dark. My new place is a 3rd-floor apartment with a doorman and security cameras everywhere. I still check twice when anyone comes to the door claiming to be maintenance or delivery. I Google every service company before letting them in. And I never, ever tell anyone I live alone anymore. The detective said I did everything right, that calling the property management company and not letting him in probably saved my life. But sometimes I still wake up at 2 in the morning, thinking I hear something at the window, even though I'm 3 stories up now and I know he's locked up until 2028. Most people assume nothing bad happens in quiet suburban neighborhoods, especially during spring break, when everyone's either traveling or sleeping in until noon. I was 17, a junior at Riverside High, and my parents had driven up to visit my older brother at college for the weekend, leaving me alone in our 2-story colonial house on Willow Court. I'd stayed behind because I had a shift at the ice cream shop on Saturday, and honestly just wanted some time to myself, binge-watching shows and eating junk food, without anyone judging me. The neighborhood was one of those places where kids still rode bikes in the street, and people actually knew each other's names, where the biggest drama was usually someone's lawn getting too tall, or a package thief making rounds during the holidays. I'd lived there my whole life, knew every family on our block, could tell you which house had the mean German shepherd, and which one gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween. The knock came around 2 in the afternoon, right when I was deep into a true crime documentary about home invasions, which in hindsight feels almost too ironic. It was 3 firm raps, not the familiar rhythm of our neighbor Mrs. Coleman, who always did this little melodic pattern, or the aggressive pounding of delivery drivers who were behind schedule. I paused the show, waited a few seconds to see if they'd just leave whatever package and go, but then came 3 more knocks, slower this time, more deliberate. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men standing on our porch, both wearing jeans and plain t-shirts. One navy blue, one faded gray. Nothing particularly threatening about their appearance except maybe how they stood perfectly still, not shifting their weight or checking their phones like most people do when waiting at a door. The younger one had buzzed hair and looked maybe 30, with a narrow face and eyes that were this really pale green, almost like sea glass, while the older one, probably mid-40s, had dark hair that was just starting to gray at the temples and thick eyebrows that met in the middle when he squinted against the afternoon sun. I opened the door but kept the chain on, which gave me maybe 3 inches of space to talk through, and immediately the younger one stepped forward, close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke and something else, maybe motor oil or that harsh soap mechanics use. "Hey there, sorry to bother you," he said, and his voice had this weird flatness to it, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized but didn't quite believe in. "We're looking for our dog, a beagle mix named Copper. About 40 pounds, brown and white patches. He slipped out of his collar about an hour ago and we tracked him to this street." The older man stayed back on the porch steps, but he was scanning our front yard, then the windows of our house, his gaze moving systematically from left to right like he was cataloging every detail, every possible entry point. I told them I hadn't seen any dogs, offered to keep an eye out, gave them the standard polite response you give to strangers who show up at your door with a reasonable request. But the younger one kept talking, asking if maybe the dog could have gotten into our backyard, if we had any gaps in our fence, if I was home alone, or if my parents might have seen something. The questions made my chest tight in that instinctive way your body warns you before your brain catches up, and I found myself gripping the door handle hard enough that my knuckles ached. "Just me here, but I've been inside all day," I lied, even though my mom's car was visible in the driveway and obviously someone had been home to answer the door. But the younger man just nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away for later. The older one finally spoke up, his voice deeper, rougher, with this slight accent I couldn't place, maybe somewhere from Eastern Europe. "You have a beautiful home, very well maintained. Your parents must work very hard." It wasn't a question, and the way he said it, emphasizing the word parents while staring directly at me through those 3 inches of door gap, made every alarm bell in my head start screaming. I told them good luck finding Copper, practically slammed the door shut, twisted the deadbolt, and watched through the peephole as they stood there for another solid 30 seconds before the younger one said something to the older one that made them both laugh. This quiet, shared moment that felt somehow worse than if they'd been angry about my abruptness. I watched them walk down our driveway, neither of them looking back, and they got into this white van that had no windows in the back, no company logo, nothing but dirt caked on the license plate, making it impossible to read. They drove off slowly, maybe 15 miles per hour, and turned left at the stop sign, which would take them out of the neighborhood if they kept going straight. But something in my gut told me they weren't leaving. Not really. I called my mom immediately, told her about the weird guys looking for their dog, and she did that parent thing where she's trying not to sound worried while simultaneously asking me 50 questions about what they looked like, what they wanted, if I'd locked all the doors. She offered to come home right away, but it was a 3-hour drive, and honestly, in the daylight with the doors locked and our neighbor Mr. Hoffman mowing his lawn next door, I felt silly for being so paranoid. Still, I went through the house checking every window lock, made sure the sliding door to the back patio had the wooden rod in the track, even pushed a chair under the doorknob of the door that led from our garage to the kitchen, which I'd seen someone do in a movie once. For the next 2 hours, I tried to go back to normal, made myself a sandwich, switched from true crime to some mindless reality show about people buying houses in tropical places, texted with my friend Amber about her date the night before. Every few minutes, though, I'd find myself walking to the front window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out at the street, expecting to see that white van creeping past. But there was nothing except the usual Saturday afternoon quiet, someone walking their actual dog, a few kids on scooters. Around 4:30, the sun was starting to slant through the trees, creating these long shadows across our front yard, and I was in the kitchen making popcorn when I heard a car door slam. Not unusual, except it sounded close, like right in front of our house close. I crept to the dining room window, which gave me a view of the driveway, and my whole body went rigid when I saw them. The same two men from earlier, standing at the end of our driveway where it met the sidewalk, just standing there, not moving, not talking, both of them facing our house with their arms hanging loose at their sides. They stood there for what must have been 5 full minutes, though it felt like hours, and I stayed frozen at the dining room window, barely breathing, my phone gripped so tight in my hand that the edges dug into my palm. The younger one had his head tilted slightly to one side like he was listening for something, while the older one's lips were moving just barely, maybe counting, maybe rehearsing something. I couldn't tell from that distance. Then, without any warning or signal that I could see, they both started walking up our driveway in perfect synchronization, same pace, same stride length, like they'd practiced this approach, and I scrambled backwards, knocking into a dining room chair that scraped against the hardwood floor, loud enough that I was sure they heard it. But they didn't knock this time, didn't ring the doorbell. They just stood on our front porch, and through the thin curtains on the door's side windows, I could see their silhouettes, distorted and dark, one standing directly in front of the door while the other seemed to be examining the door frame, running his fingers along the edges, where the lock met the wood. My phone was already dialing 911 when the older one pressed his face against the small window beside the door, cupping his hands around his eyes to see inside better. And I swear he was smiling. Not a normal smile, but this slow, deliberate stretching of his lips that showed too many teeth. The operator answered just as the doorknob rattled. A gentle test at first, then harder, more insistent, and I whispered that 2 men were trying to break into my house, gave her our address in a voice that came out high and shaky like a little kid's. She told me officers were on the way, to stay on the line, to get somewhere safe, and I was backing toward the stairs, thinking I could lock myself in my parents' bedroom, which had a phone and a lock and a window that opened onto the garage roof if I needed to run. The rattling stopped suddenly, and through the curtains I saw them step back from the door, the younger one pulling something from his pocket that caught the late afternoon light, metal and thin, probably a lockpick or maybe a Slim Jim, the kind of tools that would make quick work of our standard suburban locks. But then Mr. Hoffman's voice cut through everything, loud and gruff the way it got when he'd been drinking beer in his garage all afternoon. "Everything all right over there, gentlemen?" I peeked through the dining room window again and saw him standing at the property line between our houses, holding a rake but really just holding it like you might hold a baseball bat. And even though he was in his 60s with a bad knee from his construction days, he had that stance that said he'd seen enough bar fights to know how to end one. The 2 men turned toward him in that same synchronized way that made my skin prickle, and the younger one raised his hand in this casual wave, called out something about looking for their lost dog again, asking if he'd seen a beagle around. But Mr. Hoffman just stood there, not buying it for a second. "Funny thing," he said, taking a few steps closer. "I've been out here for 3 hours doing yard work, haven't seen a single dog that wasn't on a leash, and you boys have been sitting in that van down the street for the last hour before you came knocking." The older man started to say something, but we all heard the sirens at the same time, growing louder, definitely heading our way, and without a word, both men walked quickly, but not quite running back to their van, Mr. Hoffman following them with his eyes until they drove off, this time much faster, tires actually squealing a little as they took the corner. The police arrived maybe 90 seconds after the van disappeared. 2 officers who looked barely older than my brother, and they took everything seriously even though the men were already gone. They walked through the yard, checked for any attempted entry points, found some scratches on the door lock that looked fresh, took photos of everything including the boot prints on our porch that had this distinctive waffle pattern on the sole. Mr. Hoffman gave his statement, told them about the van's license plate which he'd actually managed to catch most of despite the dirt. Turns out he'd been suspicious enough to write it down after he saw them lingering, and one of the officers ran it right there in his cruiser. The plates came back as reported stolen from a vehicle 2 towns over, which made everyone's expression change from routine response to something much more serious. And suddenly they were calling for additional units to canvass the neighborhood, asking if I had somewhere else to stay for the night, strongly suggesting I not remain in the house alone. My parents drove home like bats out of hell, made it in just over 2 hours. My dad talking to me on speakerphone the whole time while my mom drove. And I spent those hours at Mr. Hoffman's house, sitting in his living room that smelled like cigarettes and Old Spice, while his wife Dorothy made me eat 3 different kinds of cookies and kept patting my shoulder. The police found the van abandoned in a grocery store parking lot 6 miles away, completely wiped clean of prints. Nothing inside except some rope, zip ties, and a roll of duct tape in the back that made everyone real quiet when the detective mentioned it on the phone. They never found the men, though the detective, a woman named Brennan with kind eyes and a scar through her left eyebrow, told us they matched the description of 2 suspects wanted for questioning in 3 home invasion cases in the neighboring county, cases where they'd used the same lost dog story to scope out houses. In 2 of those cases, they'd come back later when they thought the houses were empty, except one time a family's college-aged daughter had been homesick from work, and what happened to her was bad enough that Detective Brennan wouldn't give us details, just said we'd been incredibly fortunate that Mr. Hoffman had been outside, that I'd called 911 when I did. We installed a security system the next week, cameras and motion sensors and panic buttons in every room. The whole expensive package that my parents would have called overkill a month earlier. I finished out my junior year sleeping with my door locked and a baseball bat beside my bed, jumping at every unexpected knock, every van that drove too slowly past our house. The strange thing is, about 8 months later, I was at the mall 2 towns over with friends when I saw him, the younger one with the pale green eyes, working at a phone repair kiosk, wearing a polo shirt with a name tag that said Kevin, helping some elderly woman with her screen protector like he was just another normal person with a normal job. He saw me at the exact moment I saw him, and for maybe 3 seconds we just stared at each other across the food court, my friends chattering about prom dresses while every cell in my body screamed at me to run. He smiled then, that same slow, deliberate expression I'd seen through my door window, gave me this little mock salute with 2 fingers, and went right back to helping his customer like nothing had happened. I never told anyone about seeing him, not my parents, not the police, because what would I say? That one of the men who'd tried to break into our house was just out there living his life, fixing phones at the Westfield Mall, probably still looking for lost dogs that didn't exist, still standing in people's driveways at dusk, waiting for the right moment that thankfully, for me, never came. I grew up in a pretty average townhouse, 2 floors plus a small crawl space attic no one ever used. Back then it was just me and my mom, since my dad worked out of state for weeks at a time. Most afternoons after school I'd be home alone until she finished her shift at the diner. I actually liked the quiet. I'd usually grab some cereal, put on whatever was on TV, and just enjoy not having anyone around. That day was no different at first. I had thrown my backpack down by the stairs, fixed myself a snack, and was sitting on the couch when I caught a faint sound above me. It wasn't the house settling. It was rhythmic, like someone shifting their weight. At first I tried brushing it off. Old houses creak, right? But this place wasn't that old, and I knew the sounds it normally made. This one was heavier, like a slow drag or someone scooting. I muted the TV and held my breath, straining to catch it again. There it was, directly above the living room ceiling where the crawl space stretched across the top floor. I remember glancing at the clock on the wall. It was barely past 4 p.m., too early for my mom to be home. The thought of being alone in the house suddenly didn't feel so comforting. I grabbed a broom from the corner and tapped the ceiling, half expecting silence. Instead, the sound stopped for a moment. Then something answered back. 3 short thumps. Deliberate. My heart jumped so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I whispered "no way" to myself, trying to convince my brain I hadn't just been answered. I thought maybe a raccoon had gotten up there, but raccoons don't knock in patterns. I stood frozen in the living room, gripping that broom like it would actually help me if someone dropped down through the attic hatch. After what felt like forever, I worked up the nerve to creep upstairs. Every step felt impossibly loud against the carpet, like I was broadcasting that I was coming. The crawl space entrance was at the end of the hallway ceiling, with a little pull cord dangling. That cord had always annoyed me when I was younger. It swung slightly when the air conditioning kicked on, but at that moment it looked like a trigger I did not want to touch. I stood under it, broom still in my hand, staring up at the thin rectangle in the ceiling. The silence was unbearable. Then, as if to confirm my worst thought, I heard what sounded unmistakably like fabric rustling just above me. I backed away from the hatch and went into my room, shutting the door quietly like that thin layer of wood would do anything. I tried calling my mom, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I remember pacing in circles, considering whether I should just run outside and wait on the curb, but a part of me needed to know. The sound of fabric wasn't random. It was steady, like someone adjusting themselves in a sleeping bag. I kept replaying the knocks in my head. Whoever was up there knew I was in the house, and that thought made the walls feel like they were closing in. After about 10 minutes of silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to grab the step ladder from the laundry closet. Every step as I dragged it down the hallway felt heavier than it should have. I positioned it under the hatch, the broom clenched so tight my knuckles were white. I told myself I'd just push the door open quickly, shine the flashlight on my phone, and confirm that it was an animal or nothing at all. My heart was hammering so loud I could hear it echoing in my ears. When I finally pulled the cord, the hatch creaked open just an inch, and a wave of hot, stale air rolled down over me. The crawl space smelled faintly of sweat and something sour, not like insulation or dust. I lifted the door further and aimed the light up. At first, I only caught a glimpse of wood beams and cluttered insulation, but then my eyes locked on a plastic wrapper lying on top of the insulation. Next to it was a crumpled water bottle, lying exactly where no one should have been. That's when I heard it, shifting again, farther back in the darkness. Someone was lying flat, deeper in. I didn't stick around to see more. I slammed the hatch shut so hard the ladder wobbled and I bolted downstairs. My phone was already in my hand as I dialed 911. I remember how hard it was to keep my voice steady, trying to explain to the dispatcher that there was someone living above my room. They told me to stay outside and wait for officers. Standing barefoot in the driveway with my backpack still inside, I kept staring at the second-floor window, half expecting a face to appear. Those 15 minutes waiting for the squad car felt like hours, every sound from the neighborhood making me flinch. 2 officers finally pulled up, and I nearly ran to meet them. I remember how surreal it felt to explain everything again on the curb while pointing at the attic window. They didn't look convinced at first, until I told them about the smell, the wrappers, and the deliberate knocks. One officer went upstairs with his flashlight while the other stayed with me, and kept asking if I was sure no relatives had been staying there. I shook my head so hard it almost hurt. Then came a shout from above. "We've got something." They didn't find a person at that moment, but what they brought down still makes me uneasy to think about. A rolled-up sleeping bag, flattened from use, and a small pile of granola bar wrappers with water bottles tucked behind the insulation. The officer explained in that calm, professional tone that someone had been living up there for a while, sneaking in and out without us noticing. No forced entry anywhere in the house, no broken locks. Whoever it was had either been hiding for weeks or knew exactly when to come and go. Hearing that felt worse than if they had caught someone red-handed. That night, my mom and I barely slept. Every time the house shifted, we jumped. She called a locksmith first thing the next morning and had every lock replaced, even the windows. We also installed a padlock on the crawl space hatch itself. For weeks, I avoided walking down the hallway at night because that pull cord felt like it was taunting me. The police never figured out who it was. They dusted the hatch for prints, but nothing useful came up. Apparently, cases like this happen more often than people think, which is not the reassurance I wanted. To this day, whenever I hear any sound above me, I can't help but picture someone pressed flat against the beams, waiting. I'll never forget the deliberate rhythm of those knocks, like the stranger wanted me to know I wasn't alone. Even though they're long gone, the thought of how close they were still makes my chest tighten. I guess the scariest part is realizing that sometimes the most dangerous people don't break into your home. They're already inside, quietly waiting for you to notice. I used to spend a lot of time at a small park a couple of blocks from my house. Back then I was 12, and that park felt like the center of my world. Basketball hoops with bent rims, a cracked swing set, and the old water fountain that barely worked but somehow always drew kids around it. That day had been normal. I shot hoops until the sun dipped low, and then started heading home, sneakers scuffing against the uneven sidewalk. Nothing about it stood out at first, but by the time I passed the corner store, I noticed a car creeping along the street, moving slower than traffic ever should on that block. It wasn't unusual to see cars cut through the neighborhood, but this one didn't just pass. It circled. I saw the same faded blue sedan loop around, headlights dim, as if the driver didn't want to draw attention. I remember the driver's hand on the wheel, long fingers drumming lightly, and the way the car kept a steady crawl, always just far enough back that I couldn't make out his face clearly. My chest tightened with each turn I took, realizing he was taking them too. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, but the pit in my stomach said otherwise. By the time I turned onto my street, the air felt heavy. The houses all looked the same, tidy lawns with trimmed hedges, but it was like the whole block had gone silent, watching me. The sedan rolled past my driveway once, and for a second I thought it would keep going. But when I shut the front door behind me and peeked through the blinds, there it was again, sliding slowly back down the street, idling at the stop sign as if it had nowhere else to be. I called out for my mom, then remembered she was still at work. My dad was on a night shift and my older brother was at a friend's house. I was alone. Hours crawled by after that. I left the TV on for background noise, tried distracting myself with video games, but every few minutes I checked the blinds. The car was gone once, then back again, parked across the street with its engine running. The low hum drifted through the glass when everything inside was quiet, a sound that didn't belong in the middle of the night on that block. I didn't know what scared me more, the idea that the driver was just sitting there staring at my house, or that he might get out. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that maybe the guy was waiting for someone who lived nearby. But then I saw the glow of a cigarette tip through the windshield. He wasn't just sitting there, he was awake, active, watching. The blinds in our living room were thin, and I felt like every time I moved he could see exactly where I was. I turned off most of the lights, hoping the house would look empty, but that only made the hum of the engine stand out louder against the silence. It was like the house itself was holding its breath with me. Around 9, the phone rang. For a second I thought about picking it up, but fear kicked in. What if it was him? That didn't make sense, but in that moment my brain spun with every possible scenario. When the answering machine clicked, I heard my brother's voice leaving a quick message about staying over one more night. I remember whispering no out loud, as if that could change it. My brother was my safety net, and without him there, the walls of the house felt thinner than ever. I tried the old trick of making it seem like someone else was home, clattering dishes in the sink, stomping around like I was talking to someone down the hall. But when I checked the window again, the car hadn't moved an inch. The orange glow of the cigarette had vanished, but the engine was still running, a constant low growl that kept vibrating through the night. The longer it stayed, the more unreal it felt. Why my house? Why me? At one point, I thought I saw the driver's side door shift, like it cracked open just a few inches. My throat went dry. I grabbed the phone, ready to call 911, but my fingers hovered over the buttons, frozen by the thought of explaining it and having the dispatcher think I was just a kid overreacting. I remember pacing in the hallway, the glow of the television flickering faintly from the living room, and every shadow in that house suddenly felt alive. I finally decided to call my mom at work. When she picked up, I tried to sound calm, but the words came out shaky as I told her there was a car outside that wouldn't leave. She didn't brush it off, which surprised me. Instead, she told me to lock every door, stay away from the windows, and that she was calling the police right away. Hearing her say that made it real. This wasn't just in my head. Someone was truly watching the house. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights filled the street. The sedan jerked forward, like the driver hadn't expected anyone to show up, and for a moment I thought he would take off. But the cruiser swung around fast, blocking the exit at the end of the block. I couldn't see what happened after that, just the silhouettes of two officers approaching the car, one with a flashlight cutting through the dark interior. I pressed my forehead against the wall by the window, straining to hear, but the engine finally cut off, leaving the block eerily quiet. An officer came to the door not long after. He asked me a few questions. If I had ever seen the man before, if he'd said anything, if he tried to approach me earlier. I told him about the circling, about the cigarette, about how he sat there for hours without moving. The officer nodded like he'd heard similar stories before, but he didn't share much else. Just said the guy had a reason to be looked into, and that I shouldn't worry because he wouldn't be coming back that night. His tone was steady, but he avoided details, which almost made it worse. I never learned what they found or why he was really there. When my mom finally came home, she hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, and we sat up together until dawn, the TV flickering quietly in the background. The street outside looked normal again by morning, like nothing had happened, but I couldn't unhear that low hum of the engine or unsee that glowing ember in the car across the street. To this day, I never got an explanation. The sedan never came back, and maybe that should be enough. But every time I walk past that park, I still glance around, half expecting to see a car creeping slowly behind me again. The house felt heavier than usual that evening, the kind of quiet that makes you notice the hum of the fridge and the faint creak of the walls settling. I was 16, home alone because my mom was working a double shift at the hospital, and my younger brother was at a friend's house. I'd been sprawled on the couch, half watching some old sitcom rerun, when the knocking started. At first it sounded ordinary, like a neighbor dropping by, but the rhythm didn't stop. It was steady, deliberate, almost rehearsed. When I got up and peeked through the peephole, there was a man standing on the porch. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a gray jacket zipped up to his chin and a baseball cap pulled low. He knocked again and called out, saying he was from the utility company. His voice carried a strange calmness, like he'd practiced this line before. But what immediately struck me was what he didn't have. No badge, no reflective vest, not even a clipboard. Just empty hands shoved into his pockets like he wasn't there for work at all. I asked through the door which company he said he was with. His answer was quick, like he'd been waiting for that question, but it still didn't sound right. He avoided giving a clear name, mumbling something about routine checks in the neighborhood. When I asked for ID, he didn't hold anything up, just said, "Don't worry, it's just a formality." My gut tightened. The longer I looked at him, the more wrong it seemed. His shoes were dirty, like he'd been walking through mud, and there was a small tear on the sleeve of his jacket that looked burned. I didn't open the door. Instead, I said my mom wasn't home and that I couldn't help him. He stood there silently for a few seconds, then knocked one more time, lighter this time, before walking away down the sidewalk. I stayed by the door until I couldn't hear his steps anymore. The house felt even quieter after that, but not in a comforting way. It was the kind of silence where you're waiting for something else to happen, where every shadow feels like it's holding its breath. After he left, I tried to shake it off. I went back to the couch, turned the volume up on the TV, and even texted my mom to let her know what happened. She told me to keep the doors locked and not answer anyone until she got home. That should have been enough to settle me, but I couldn't relax. Every time headlights passed the house, I caught myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see that gray jacket standing there again. Even the sound of branches scraping against the siding made me flinch. Around midnight, I decided to check the security cameras we had set up outside. My stepdad installed them after a string of car break-ins in the neighborhood, and usually they just captured raccoons or stray cats. I scrolled through the earlier footage and saw him again. The same man, walking past our porch after I'd closed the blinds. He lingered at the edge of the yard for nearly 2 minutes, pacing back and forth before disappearing into the darkness. I didn't notice it at the time, but on the footage he kept glancing back at the house as if waiting for the lights to go out. I couldn't sleep, so I stayed in the living room with the lights on. At around 2 in the morning, I heard faint rattling noises, like metal jingling. I muted the TV and listened closely. It was coming from the back of the house, near the sliding glass door. I pulled the camera feed back up on my phone and nearly dropped it when I saw him again. He wasn't knocking this time. He was walking slowly along the side of the house, tugging at every single door handle he came across. The garage, the laundry room, even the shed out back. His head moved side to side like he was checking for movement inside. The worst part was the way he carried himself. There was no rush, no panic, like he had all the time in the world. He even leaned close to the kitchen window at one point, pressing his forehead against the glass as if he was trying to see inside. I ducked down behind the couch, heart thudding, afraid he might spot me if I moved too quickly. Every sound in the house, pipes, air vents, the clicking of the thermostat, felt amplified, like any one of them could give me away. I stayed crouched behind the couch, gripping my phone so tight my knuckles hurt. I debated calling the police, but worried that by the time they arrived, he might already be gone. Still, after he jiggled the handle to the mudroom door twice, I dialed 911. I whispered into the phone, giving the dispatcher my address and telling her someone was actively trying to break in. She told me to stay on the line and keep hidden until officers arrived. I could hear her calm voice, but all I could focus on was the faint scrape of the man's shoes outside, dragging across the patio. The dispatcher told me to describe him, so I peeked at the camera feed again. He had pulled his cap off now, revealing short, uneven hair, like it had been shaved in patches. His face wasn't what I expected. It wasn't angry, it wasn't frantic. It was blank, almost bored, like he was testing each entry point just to see which one would give first. Watching him pull at the handle of the basement door while standing in that eerie, casual way made me feel trapped in a nightmare that had no clear script. Red and blue lights eventually lit up the street outside, flashing across the living room walls like salvation. The man stepped back from the house as if he'd finally been caught mid-thought. He didn't run. He just walked down the side yard and slipped into the shadows before the officers even reached the driveway. By the time they checked the property, he was gone. They reviewed the footage with me, took notes, and promised to patrol the area through the night. Still, none of that erased the fact that he had walked around my house for nearly an hour, testing every possible way in. I never saw him again, but for weeks after, I barely slept. Every knock at the door made me tense. My stepdad added extra locks, reinforced the sliding door, and even installed motion lights in the yard. Sometimes I still check the cameras late at night, half expecting that gray jacket to appear again at the edge of the frame. To this day, no one knows who he was or why he singled out our house, but the thought that he might still be out there, patient, waiting, makes the quietest nights feel the loudest.